The night I found out, I didn't yell. I didn't throw anything. I stood in our kitchen for a long time holding my wife's iPad, reading a message that was never meant for me, and then I set it face down on the counter, poured myself a glass of water, and went upstairs to check on my son. He was asleep. 5 years old, one arm thrown over his stuffed rabbit, breathing the slow, deep breath of a kid who has no idea the world can fall apart. I stood in the doorway for a while. Then I went back downstairs, picked up the iPad again, and read the message one more time. Can't stop thinking about last night. Same time Thursday? The sender was saved only as E. I put the iPad back exactly where Naomi had left it, angled slightly to the left on the kitchen table, charger still plugged in. I remember thinking, she'll check it when she gets back from San Diego. She'll see that nothing moved. She'll never know. That was the beginning. Naomi and I had been married for 12 years. We met in our mid-20s at a friend's birthday dinner. She was finishing her residency. I had just made associate at a mid-size firm in Chicago. We were both too tired and too busy to fall in love, and we did it anyway. She was the kind of woman who laughed at the wrong moments in movies and always knew the exact right thing to say at a funeral. She was careful and brilliant, and she loved fiercely. I believed that about her for a long time. We moved to the suburbs when our son was born. Nice neighborhood, good schools, neighbors who waved from their driveways. I made partner at my firm 5 years ago. Corporate law, contracts, mergers, the kind of work that sounds boring to everyone except the people whose money is involved. Naomi became a cardiologist at a Northwestern-affiliated hospital, eventually moved into a senior attending role. We were, by every measurable standard, doing well. I won't paint us as a perfect couple. 12 years is long enough that you stop pretending. We had our friction, the schedule conflicts, the years when our son was small, and we were both running on empty. The quiet stretches where neither of us had the energy to reach across the distance. But we had always come back to each other. We had always been honest. That was the thing I believed most. That whatever else we were honest with each other. Naomi left for the conference on a Wednesday morning. Annual cardiology symposium in San Diego, 3 days. I drove her to the airport. She kissed me twice at the departure drop-off and said she'd call when she landed. My son waved from his car seat. She forgot her iPad. That's all it was. She forgot it, and it was sitting on the kitchen table and 2 days into the conference. At 7:15 on a Friday evening while I was making pasta, and my son was watching something in the other room, a message lit up the screen. I am a corporate attorney. I have spent 20 years reading contracts, looking for the sentence that changes everything. You learn to go still when you find it. You don't react, you analyze. I read the message 3 times. I noted the sender initial. I noted the timestamp. I noted that the message previewed enough to read without unlocking the screen. I set the iPad down. I finished making dinner. I read my son a bedtime story. I put him to bed. Then I went downstairs and sat in the dark for a while, and I let myself feel everything I was going to have to stop feeling before morning. Because when the sun came up, I was going to need to be a lawyer, not a husband. Naomi came home on Saturday afternoon. She was warm and easy and brought my son a stuffed sea otter from the airport gift shop. She hugged me for a long time in the kitchen and said she'd missed us. She looked me in the eyes when she said it. I believed her, and that was the worst part. That I still believed her reflexively before my brain could catch up. She was that good. I said nothing about the message. I had already decided. Instead, on Monday morning, I called a man named Dolan. A private investigator. I had used his firm once before on a corporate fraud case, and I knew he was thorough and discreet. I told him I needed surveillance and a full background workup on a Dr. Emmett Graves at Memorial Hospital, chief of cardiology. I gave him the basics. I told him I needed documentation, not assumptions. For the next 6 weeks, I went to work. I came home, I helped with dinner, I watched movies on the couch with Naomi on Friday nights. I read to my son. I was to every outward appearance exactly the husband I had always been. Naomi seemed lighter than usual during this period. More affectionate. She started cooking on weeknights again. Something she hadn't done much since residency. She'd reach over and squeeze my hand when we were watching television. Once she said, out of nowhere, "I don't say this enough, I'm really glad I married you." I smiled and told her me too, and I meant it, and that was the worst kind of complicated feeling I have ever had to sit with in my life. Dolan called me into his office on a Tuesday in mid-October. I drove downtown on my lunch hour. He put a folder in front of me. Dr. Emmett Graves, he said, 51, chief of cardiology. Married 18 years, 3 kids, 2 in college, 1 in high school. Clean professional record, well regarded, coaches youth soccer on weekends. He let that sit for a moment. He and your wife have been meeting at the Marriott on Wacker and at his office after hours. We have documentation going back 14 months. 14, not 6. 14 months. I did the math silently. 14 months ago, my son had just started preschool. We had taken a family trip to Maine. Naomi and I had renewed our gym memberships together and gone 3 times a week, and it had felt like a good stretch in our marriage. 14 months. There's something else, Dolan said. He opened to a different section of the folder. Photographs. Naomi and Emmett at what was clearly a real estate showing, a condo building in River North. Naomi looking at a kitchen, Emmett pointing at something through a window, a real estate agent gesturing toward the view. They've been to 4 different properties over the past 2 months, Dolan said. I got a contact who confirmed they asked about long-term lease options versus purchase. I closed the folder. This wasn't a hotel arrangement. This wasn't a fling she was managing at arm's length from her real life. They were looking for somewhere to live. She had been standing in kitchens with him, thinking about countertops, thinking about light, thinking about a future, while I was home, making dinner and reading bedtime stories about frogs and dinosaurs. I thanked Dolan. I asked for the full documentation on USB as well as hard copy. I told him to send the invoice to my office. Then I drove back, picked up my son from school, and made grilled cheese sandwiches. He told me about a frog he had seen on the playground. I asked him everything he knew about frogs. It took 45 minutes. I didn't sleep much that night, but I had a plan. I should explain something about that plan, because one piece of it existed long before any of this happened. 3 years ago, when I made partner, Naomi and I revised our estate planning. Significant income change, updated insurance, all the paperwork you put off and then do all at once. Part of that process involved a postnuptial agreement. The document protected both of us equitably, and there was one clause that neither of us remarked on much at the time because it seemed obvious, almost a formality, a morality clause. If either party was found to have engaged in an extramarital relationship, that party forfeited any claim to marital assets acquired after the date of the agreement. Naomi signed it without significant concern. She had no reason to. She initialed the clause on page 7. She was entirely confident she had nothing to worry about. I thought about that document every day for the next 3 weeks. The second piece of my plan was quieter. My son had a routine pediatric appointment that month that included blood work. I arranged for an additional test. I don't entirely know what I was afraid of finding. The math mostly worked, but 14 months is long enough to make a man want certainty. 3 weeks later, the results came back. He was mine. I sat with that for a long time, a relief that was embarrassingly physical, and then I filed the result with everything else. The confrontation, the first one, was quiet, and I designed it that way. On a Saturday morning, I put on a podcast while we had coffee. I'd listened to the episode beforehand, a therapist discussing warning signs that a marriage was in trouble. Emotional withdrawal, secretive phone behavior, unexplained schedule changes, a partner who stops confiding in you. I had chosen it specifically. Naomi listened and commented freely. She said the therapist made good points. She said she was glad we communicated as well as we did. I asked her which warning signs she thought couples overlooked most, and she said, without hesitating, probably the emotional distance. People think infidelity is about sex, but it usually starts with someone stopping talking to their partner. She looked at me when she said it, like she believed it, like she was proud of the insight. My phone was on the table, recorder running. That afternoon I showed her one photograph, just one, Emmett's hand at the small of her back at what appeared to be a bar. I pulled it up and set the phone down in front of her without comment. She looked at it. The pause before she spoke was brief, but I've spent 20 years watching people decide how to answer questions they weren't prepared for, and I clocked it. That's Emmett Graves, she said. He's our chief. That was a department event a few months ago. Why do you have this? A colleague sent it to me, I said. Thought it looked like you. She shook her head with the right amount of mild offense. He was introducing me to a hospital donor. That's it. Then she looked at me more carefully. Are you worried about something? I said no. I said I just wanted to be sure. She reached across the table and held my hand and said, "You never have to worry about me." I said I knew. That night she was affectionate in a way that felt deliberate, and I understood exactly what it was. I said nothing. I let her believe she had handled it. On a Monday in November, I called my attorney. I walked her through everything. The documentation from Dolan, the recordings, the photographs, the real estate records. The post-nuptial agreement, page 7, initialed. She was quiet for a long moment, and then she said, "How long have you been sitting on this?" "About 2 months," I told her. "Simultaneous execution?" "Yes." 3 things, same day. First, the divorce filing with the morality clause invoked. My attorney would submit to the court that morning. Second, an anonymous report to the hospital's ethics board. Emmett had served on Naomi's credentialing review committee 2 years earlier. That placed him in a position of administrative authority over her professional standing at the institution, a power-adjacent dynamic that violated their own published conduct policy. I wasn't fabricating anything. I was reporting a documented fact and letting their process take it from there. Third, an envelope, hand-delivered by courier to a residential address in Wilmette, addressed to a woman named Patsy, who had been married for 18 years to a man she apparently did not know very well. Inside, a letter, photographs, copies of relevant hotel records. No note from me. Just the evidence, organized clearly. Because the one thing I could give her that nobody had given me was the chance to know the truth before another 14 months went by. We set the date for the following Thursday. Wednesday night, Naomi made us dinner and we watched a show we'd been following for weeks. Ordinary evening. She fell asleep on the couch and I sat next to her for a while before waking her gently to go to bed. I looked at her sleeping and I thought about every good thing she had ever done. And there were many, and I let myself grieve the version of her I had believed in, because that version was real enough to deserve grief, even if the actual woman had quietly decided to make it fictional. Then I went to bed and slept better than I had in months. On Thursday, my son went to school. I went to the office at 7:30. At 9:15, I sent one email and everything began to move. I don't know the exact moment Naomi was served. I know it was before noon because she called me at 12:03 and I let it go to voicemail. She called twice more. I didn't listen until that evening. I know Emmett was called to HR at approximately 10:30 because a colleague of mine mentioned over lunch that something was happening in the cardiology department. I said that was unfortunate and changed the subject. I picked my son up from school at 3:15. We stopped for ice cream. He got mint chip. He told me about a drawing he'd made of a dinosaur that was also a train. I told him that sounded like an important invention. Naomi's car was in the driveway when we got home. She was sitting at the kitchen table. She looked like she hadn't moved in hours. She looked like the floor had been pulled out from under her. And I recognized that feeling because I had felt it 2 months ago standing in the same kitchen, holding an iPad. My son ran to her and she held him for a long time with her eyes closed. After he went upstairs to play, she looked at me across the kitchen and asked how long I had known. Long enough, I told her. She started to say something about Emmett and I stopped her. I told her I didn't need her to explain Emmett. I had 14 months of documentation. I didn't have questions about facts. The only question I'd had was about who she was as a person, and I had answered that for myself over the past 2 months in ways I hadn't expected to find so clarifying. She started to cry. She said she was sorry. She said it wasn't what I thought, and then she stopped herself because she was smart enough to know how that sentence sounded. "Did you know about the condos?" I asked. She went quiet. "I know about the properties, Naomi, River North, 4 showings in 2 months. She put her face in her hands. I picked up my phone and played 40 seconds of audio. Her own voice from the Saturday morning, calm and certain. People think infidelity is about sex, but it usually starts with someone stopping talking to their partner. I stopped the recording. "I needed to know if you could look me in the eye and say that," I said. "Now I know." She told me she hadn't understood the post-nuptial clause, or rather that she hadn't realized it applied this broadly. I asked her if she would like me to email her the specific page she had initialed. She said, "Please stop." I told her I wasn't trying to be cruel. I told her I was trying to be precise, because in my experience, the cruelest thing you can do to a person in a moment like this is leave them with any ambiguity about where they actually stand. "You can stay tonight," I said. "Our son needs his routine. Tomorrow I'll take him to school, and you can come back and take what you need. My attorney will be in touch with yours about next steps." "I don't want a divorce," she said quietly. "I know," I said, "but I do." What happened over the following 8 months was largely procedural. The postnuptial held. Naomi's attorneys found no meaningful grounds to contest the morality clause. She had signed the document. She had initialed the specific page. She had done so with her own independent counsel present at execution. I kept the house, which I had purchased before the marriage. I kept my retirement accounts, the investment portfolio I had spent 20 years building, and the equity accumulated after the agreement date. Naomi retained her savings, her vehicle, her personal accounts. We agreed on joint legal custody with primary physical placement to me. My son stays with me the majority of the week. He sees his mother on alternating weekends and one evening midweek. He is doing well. Kids adapt better than we give them credit for, particularly when neither parent puts them in the middle of it, which I was determined not to do, regardless of how I felt about anything else. Emmett resigned from his position as chief of cardiology in December, about 6 weeks after the ethics report was submitted. The hospital didn't publicly terminate him. That is not how these institutions operate. But the findings were sufficient to make his position untenable. He lost the title, the authority, and the considerable salary differential that came with both. Patsy filed for divorce the following spring. I have never spoken to her, and I don't intend to. Whatever she needed to know, she knows now, and what she does with her life from here is her own. Naomi left Memorial about 4 months later. The professional environment had become complicated in ways that were partly consequential and partly her own decision. She practices now at a smaller cardiology group in another city. I believe she is doing reasonable work there. I want my son's mother to be healthy and functional. I want that sincerely, not as a performance of grace, but as a practical matter. A stable mother makes for a more stable child, and my son is what this was always actually about. I went back to therapy for the first time since my 30s. My therapist asked me once what I imagined Naomi had been looking for, and I said I honestly didn't know. She had everything, I told him. We had built something real, and maybe that was its own kind of answer. Maybe what they had built together in those 4 condo showings in River North was something she wanted more than what we had, and she convinced herself she could hold both worlds indefinitely without either one collapsing. She was wrong about that. That's not revenge. That's just the way things fall. Here is what I want to say, if you've been listening. I'm not entirely proud of the calculated months. The part of me that sat across from my wife on that Saturday morning and played a podcast I had specifically selected to watch her answer its questions. I'm not sure I completely admire that version of myself. I was effective. I was thorough. But there is something cold about doing things that way, and I know it, and I've sat with it enough to say so. I'm also not going to pretend the outcome didn't bring a certain kind of satisfaction, which is to say, the brief, clean satisfactions that comes when consequences arrive in proportion to choices. That feeling didn't last long. What lasted was something quieter, not grief for the marriage ending exactly, but for the years preceding it that I now had to review differently. Was she unhappy then? Was I missing something? You can make yourself crazy asking that. At some point, I decided to stop. My son starts first grade in the fall. He has lost exactly 1 tooth so far and treated the occasion as a significant event. Last month, he informed me he wants to be a marine biologist or possibly a chef, and I told him both were solid options with room to combine them. I run 3 miles most mornings now. I started because I needed somewhere to put the anger that didn't involve my son watching me carry it. Now I run because I genuinely like it, which is a small thing, but it's mine. A woman I met at a friend's dinner party some months back has been texting me. We've had coffee twice. I am not in any particular hurry, but I notice that I'm not afraid of what it means, and that absence of fear feels like a kind of progress I didn't know I was making until I was already well into it. That's everything I have to say. 12 years is a long time to share a life with someone, and when it ends the way ours did, people want you to either erase everything that came before or excuse everything that went wrong. I find I can't do either. What I can do is be honest about what happened, take care of my son, and keep going. That, it turns out, is more than enough.